Hello, this fine wall is called a murus dacius and is a type of, let's say, dry stone wall that defies many stereotypes about ancient stone walls, making it not only unique but almost the polar opposite of the Cyclopean works in Europe. Like this, polygonal masonry is a mystery because, despite being very common in South Europe, amongst other places, we basically know nothing about them and have to speculate on nearly everything. Who built it, how, why, when? In most cases, we just don't know. And what we seem to know is merely an educated guess, often tinted by academic prejudice. However, when it comes to today's wall, although apparently similar to the Cyclopean walls, we know more than enough to enhance the other's mystery. These walls are found in present day Romania, a country named after Rome and speaking a Romance language like Portuguese or Italian. For the casual observer, these characteristics would mean Romania was at the heart of the Roman world. But no, Dacia, as it was called then, was one of the shortest lived provinces, far on the outskirts of the empire, holding merely a century under Roman control, and leaving us to this day uncertain on how the Latin culture got to thrive there, after surviving so much confusion in the Middle Ages. Maybe Freud could explain why the nation stuck so hard to their Roman heritage. Because, as we'll see, Romania was not ever a part of the older coastal European culture, the one I call Cyclopean. The walls of Dacia or the Murus Dacius are relatively young. They were built just in the 1st century AD, but they are also the oldest set of stone buildings around, since before them there were no other walls in the area. No walls, nor dolmens, no astronomical stone clocks, nor crazy rock sculptures. The megalithic culture that once covered basically all of coastal Europe from Scandinavia into Thracia just did not settle in Romania. Obviously, there were other people around. Despite not attracting the megalithic builders, the plains around the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube Delta are very welcoming for human habitation. So, since the beginning of time, people like to stick around, leaving us with the habitual axes, pottery, metallurgy, wooden hill forts, and maybe even writing. Well, this writing bit is doubtful. In Romania, there were found something called the Tartarian tablets, dated 5000 BC, and featuring some convincing symbols that could be the oldest form of writing in the world. Nevertheless, writing or not, since then until the Dacian walls, for thousands of years they were not building with stone, and that's not Cyclopean at all. The Dacian cities, cultures, and walls were, although involuntarily, developed by the Romans. That was because at the beginning of our era, the Dacians were not yet into city building, nor stone cutting, and were more like a free range type of folks, not unlike the Celtic tribes, living in wooden huts with volatile political alliances and plenty of fighting spirit. This was until 60 BC, when some Dacian bands invaded the Roman Empire, surprised and defeated the legionnaires, and extorted a hefty ransom from Rome. That money was then used by the Dacian rulers to build temples and walls and to consolidate the Dacian capital as a sumptuous city. Like the European Union subsidies. Then, within a century and a half, After the Dacians had built something worth coveting, the fortunes turned, and the Romans overruled Dacia and took everything they liked. You know, like the European Union subsidies. Just another century or so, and the pendulum swings back yet again. By then, the Roman Empire was cracking and looked appetizing for everybody else. Thus, Dacia, the last province to be conquered, was the first to be lost, invaded by bands of barbarian refugees after the Roman wealth. You know, like the European Union subsidies. That short lived Roman province was called Dacia, but not the people that built the Dacian walls. Well, they were the same people, but it's just the name, Dacian, is likely an exonym given by outsiders, since we cannot put a finger on who really were those guys. The Dacian are a discrete band that we basically know nothing about, because maybe in the same way Romania would centuries later stick to the Latin heritage, there appears to be a void in the underlying culture. Arguably, the Dacian were an Indo-European culture related to the older Thracian, living a bit to the south, in Bulgaria. But that is, at best, a distant link, because by the 4th or 5th century BC, the Thracian were already an advanced urbanized culture, whilst the Dacian were still living in huts. This whole confusion comes from ancient sources, like Ptolemy, suggesting Dacian were those living in cities with name ending in Dava or similar. Those are quite common in Romania and even Bulgaria, including Plovdiv, an old city with a Cyclopean wall, built long before the Thracian, let alone the Dacian, were even a thing. So, not to get bogged down in all of this, just take this timeline. 1. The people living in Romania until the Bronze Age would call their villages something Dava. Then 2. Come the Thracian in Bulgaria. Then 3. The Dacians as we know them settle in Romania. And finally, Plovdiv, with its Cyclopean wall and the name ending in Div or Dava. Might be just a coincidence. There are like 6 fortresses around the former Dacian capital, making up the Decebalus defensive system, named after the king that was eventually defeated by the Romans, despite the fortresses and his system. Most of these sites have little more than the Dacian walls for defensive purposes, and maybe that was to be expected from a culture that had just started to build cities a few decades earlier. Except in Sarmizegetusa, the capital, that has, beyond the protective walls, a citadel with some interesting pre-Roman features, including ceramic pipes for running water, one astronomical clock, and even a very large round plate of stone for stuff, amongst other amenities, making it equivalent to other capitals that live off borrowed money, overspending for the show-off and well-being of the ruling class. The murus dacicush, although nice, are too different from Cyclopean walls, leaving no doubts there is no relation between them. Because of this, 1. They come in later, over 1,000 years at least, Cyclopean walls in Europe are a product of the Bronze Age, and even if some bureaucrats insist the walls are younger, no one claims the Cyclopean work ever reached classical times, whereas Dacian walls are way more recent than that, so completely out of time. 2. The writing on the walls. Despite those Tartarian tablets being some sort of maybe old writing, Dacian language itself was not written, and for that it could be a proper Cyclopean culture, as Cyclopean walls are pre-writing. However, some stones in the Dacian walls have markings made in proper Greek letters, revealing that they were built by the late Greek masons and not by the much older Cyclopean. 3. The Dacian walls were built for defense and apparently not good enough at it, as the Romans did conquer the place. Nevertheless, it is worth noticing that we have reasons to believe Cyclopean walls were built not for defense but for the aggrandizement of citadels, to build shiny places on top of the hill, thus again separating Cyclopean walls from the Dacian. 4. More important, there are the wooden beams inserted in those little holes on the rock, keeping the structure together. The Dacian walls have no mortar to glue the stones, but unlike proper Cyclopean work, those squared blocks would not hold properly on their own. So the builders introduced wooden beams to ensure stability. That solution is clever, but not Cyclopean. 5. Finally, the know-how. One tells sign that the Cyclopean builders were a singular culture, or at least sharing relevant info with each other, is that they had the nerve to build those walls. Somehow, the Cyclopean builders knew that an intricate puzzle of rock without mortar was worth all the extra work required, whilst everybody else, not initiated in the technique, just resorted to simpler ways, either with mortar or wooden beams, again suggesting the Dacian walls are not Cyclopean and that by the time they were built the Cyclopean know-how was lost. The inspiration for the Muruș Dacicuș in Romania could be coming from the Muruș Gallicuș in France, including the name, the culture and also the usage of wood to strengthen the wall. The name is for sure. Muruș Dacicuș was not used by ancient sources and is just a recent creation, mimicking the name given by Caesar to describe the walls he faced in the Gallic Wars. Those were some non-Cyclopean walls, reinforced with wood, built by the Gauls in France. And finally, there's the culture, because the Gauls were Celts, and there were plenty of other Celts living nearby Dacia, so they could have influenced one another. Noting that all that proximity between Gallicuș and Dacicuș just further separates them from the Cyclopean. I've been hammering this idea in other videos that you might have watched, and if you didn't, you are missing big time. It's like this. In the early Bronze Age, the whole of Europe was following a clash of civilizations between the old Cyclopean builders and the incoming Indo-European talkers. The latter would prevail, and by the Iron Age, Cyclopean construction was extinct in the continent. Now, For this theory to make sense, before it all started, the two groups had to be living their own separate ways, on two sides of some border, such as the Danube River. In fact, south of the Danube there are Cyclopean walls, dolmens, and many other crazy stone sculptures, whilst to the north of the river there's none of it, with all prehistoric cultures up there living in huts and not building with stone. Plus, we have reasons to believe the original corridor used by the Indo-Europeans to cross south into the Mediterranean was precisely these plains facing the Black Sea, with that idea now reinforced by the absence of stone constructions in Romania, right until our era, and the Dacian exploits. Here's the thing, the Muros Dacians are sort of a late attempt to shortcut history, with the Dacian tribes playing catch-up with the Romans and what else had been built south of the Danube for millennia, entering in a late building spree, not unlike other Celtic efforts. Whilst the Cyclopean walls further south are totally unrelated, including that we are not quite sure of when and how or by whom they were built. All that we are certain is that at the beginning of our era the Cyclopean builders were already extinct, and the Dacian tribes were not yet a settled culture and not building stone cities. Also, there is no precedent in Romania for Cyclopean nor megalithic builders, providing us with yet another sign of a very old cultural clash between the Indo-Europeans coming in from the mainland and the former Cyclopean builders on the coast, as we keep seeing in a bunch of other locations. That's it for today. Hope you liked it. See you in the comments.